sufficient for a quorum. Thank you, Anthony. Sufficient numbers for a quorum. I would propose we get started, and then if Sarah were to join us, she'll just join us when she gets here. Yeah, so let's get into it. It looks like it's 6:02. We'll open up the meeting. So welcome everybody to the planning board's meeting, November 4th, 2021. The first order of business is to just have a public discussion on the proposed subdivision ordinance rewrite, which I great interest to you folks here who have submitted some comments, and we're here to help out with those if we can. And I believe, I'm not sure how we want to get started, but I do know we do have a written memo from Mr. Feinberg, who submitted some information. So is that, Mr. Paul, is that you? Is he here?
He's online.
He's online, okay, all right. So maybe you can guide us through these as we go along, but does everybody on the planning board have the memo from Paul Feinberg?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Are there other written comments that we've received, Peter, or?
I have only received those.
Okay.
Yeah, that was the only one that I saw so far. Yeah. So I'm going to suggest that we go through those and follow the structure that he had, and then we can discuss.
How did you want to proceed? Did you want to like give everybody 5 minutes to talk, present their oral comments, or?
Oh, like in terms of what we're trying to accomplish? with
Yeah,
this? And
yeah, so that everybody gets a equal opportunity, and then if there's time left over in our first hour,
Right, that's a
so we
good
can have
point.
more detailed
Yeah.
discussion.
So yeah, let's talk about it a little bit. So we do have an hour for this discussion. And maybe are you suggesting that we talk about sort of the overarching goals of the rewrite? Or talk
No,
about-
I was thinking of giving everybody their a time slot of 5 minutes. Grab 1, 2, 3, 4, 5
Yeah.
people here, at least 2, it looks like, online. That's
Yeah.
30, you know.
I see. Yeah.
That's 35 minutes right there.
Yeah, that would be, I think, quite fair to present that option.
Now, not everybody may have comments, but
Correct, right. So let's offer this up to the people both here physically and those who are here virtually. So I'd like to open it up for anybody who might have things to say. I would just ask that if you do have something to say, we'll time it 5 minutes. That's what you have. Just please give us your name and please let us know what you have to say about it. So the floor is open for those who might have comments. So keep an eye on any hands raised for anybody virtually.
I have a comment.
Yes,
Can you hear me?
yes.
Okay, I have a quick comment and one question. My name is W. Minot Wood. The comment, Mr. Chairman and board members, is I've been silently following this as a professional engineer. And I think you guys have done a fantastic job on this rewrite.
Thank you for your input. We really appreciate it. And we really value the whole idea of being able to get public input to help us modernize and get this up to date. It's a really important process. Thank you.
Now, my quick question, I'll try and make it quick. Many municipalities in different states, including Maine and I think Belgrade, use a threshold of 1 dwelling unit per 100,000 square feet lot size to protect the surface water, groundwater, and thereby drinking water. And under the definition of minor subdivision, you revise that 6 acres or less for 3 lots, not counting the mother lot, would constitute a minor subdivision. I just think it would behoove the board to change that to 7 acres, because that would give the landowner or subdivider chance to have 1 dwelling unit per 100,000 square feet, thereby more protecting the drinking water and groundwater. And you still have the option of requiring a hydrologic study on page 15. So that's my comment. Keeping it at 6 acres, there's no way to have 3 lots meet that one dwelling unit per 100,000 square feet. If you know what I'm trying to say.
I believe so. And I guess I would want to check with the planning board members how you'd like to feel about this, because there would be many comments we potentially could hear tonight. I think at this point, it might be unrealistic to think that we could hear them and then decide on the changes, all of them, all at once.
My thought on this though is, a minimum lot size is 1 acre, so it's 40 and some change. So then we, by requiring 100,000, we'd be changing that minimum lot size.
Well, Nick, if I may, it's not a minimum lot size, it's just an option. And I think somewhere in the regulations, you also have that if it's, I forget the exact, if it's twice as big or more than, I think if it's twice as big, you need some language on the plans and the deeds that is restricted to 1 lot forever. I'm not saying a minimum lot size, I'm just saying give that option so that you could have 1 dwelling per 100,000 square feet, thereby protecting the drinking water better. If it's a subsurface sewage disposal system and a well for drinking water. I'm not trying to change the definition of minimum lot. I'm just saying if it was 7 acres, they would have the option to have 1 dwelling unit per 100,000 square feet. At 6 acres, it's less than 100,000. It has to
Well,
do,
As long as it's not a requirement, but it gives them the potential to be able to do it, then yeah, I would agree with that as well.
Thanks, Craig, for the consideration. Yes, George.
Peter, to answer your question, I don't think it would be appropriate for us to resolve any or totally respond to any one comment that we get until we, at minimum, heard from everybody. Otherwise, we're kind of dismissive of those folks that haven't had a chance to speak yet.
Okay. So,
Mr. Chairman,
yes, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I'll be quiet. I just wanted to bring that up. I think it does a better job protecting the drinking water.
Okay, it's a very good point well made, and we have at least some positive initial feedback. So thank you for your comments. I appreciate that. It's been just about 5 minutes, 4 minutes and change by my look at the clock.
Thank you guys for all your work, and I'm gonna mute myself now.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else have a comment that would like to say something? Yes, sir.
Tom Dowd, I also own Belgrade Lakes Marine and Storage. I don't know if this is the appropriate time to ask, but point of clarification, if I want to add a storage building in the gravel pit, which is internally drained, do I also have to basically hire an engineer to certify that it's not going to impact the Great Pond watershed, even though it's internally drained?
Let's see, so I'm not sure if we can answer that quite yet, but I just want to make sure I get the question correctly. So your question is if you wanted to add a what?
Storage building.
A building to an existing property that you already have?
Correct. The last time it went before the planning board, I believe they accepted that the main DEP said that it was internally drained. And I don't know how to interpret the new proposal here, where it says that you're required to hire a registered professional engineer, whether that would be waived or whether that's an absolute requirement.
So Mr. Dowd, what I've written down is if your question is.
All right, I'm going up. Have a good time.
I'm sorry. So Mr. Dowd, I tried to write down the question this way. If you wanted to add to an existing property, something that's another building that is internally drained
Correct.
to the boundaries of your property, right? Would a PE be required? Did I capture that correctly?
That's correct.
Okay. Right, so do you mind if we consider that and then hear other things before we get back to the answer?
Well, that's fine.
Okay, thank you. Okay, that's,
So what would that fall under, commercial subdivision?
that would be my thinking. But I'd like to make sure we go through any comments, because we do have some comments from Mr. Feinberg too, I want to get to, so for that part, to get through it first, but I'm with you, Craig. I am. So I'd like to turn to the audience, both physically present and virtually present. Are there any other comments? Not seeing any there. And Mr. Feinberg, I see that you're with us. I see you're there. Hi. And if you're speaking, you're muted, just so you know.
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, hi.
Hi.
Having no other hands raised for other comments at this point, I'd like to go through your, you had a memo to the planning board. This is about the rewrite on the subdivision, correct?
Right.
Okay,
I'm sorry, I just, I talked to Anthony this afternoon. He suggested that I put my comments in writing, which I did in a rush. I just read the whole bylaw, the whole ordinance. I wouldn't say I read it word for word, maybe a little skimming in there.
okay. So thank you for your time and efforts and contributions on this. So if the planning board's okay, could we just go through that memo? A bit, no objections. So I'm not sure if people in the audience have this in front of them.
No.
You do not, okay. So I'll read them out loud so you can hear what Mr. Feinberg had to say.
Maybe we could ask Mr. Feinberg just to summarize for everybody's.
Yeah, I think some of them, the suggestion from Anthony was that I put it in a memo because some of it is typos and not really worth discussing. I have like a couple of major points, which is I'm a member of the Lake Committee, and I'm also a board member of the BLA, and I'm on the Water Quality Committee, and I'm a seasonal resident. And I practice law in Massachusetts, and by way of background, I've also been a real estate developer, so I'm somewhat familiar with subdivision control bylaws.
Great, let's have you go through your major highlights and your major points, so the substantive ones rather than the typos. How would that be?
What I understood from when the Lake Committee had George Seal make a presentation, that one of the issues that came up in the Brightside case was that I guess it was the Seven Lakes, Danielle Ween perhaps came in with some technical data that may have been in conflict with the applicant's engineer. I wasn't there. I'm just, but my first point is that in major subdivision, I think that the planning board should have the authority to require as a condition from the applicant what I call peer review, which is to hire and have the applicant pay for an engineer or various engineers to go over the applicant's application and to educate planning board, because so much of the requirements of a major subdivision and a minor subdivision are technical and scientific. And some of it is even subjective. A lot of it is what's reasonable, what's unreasonable. So my major point is that I think that there should be a provision and authority for peer review. And there are provisions that do provide for certain situations, like there's a wildlife biologist is in a major subdivision can be retained by the planning board to deal with impact on habitat And I think there's also one for a hydrologist could be asked to be hired by the board. But I just think this, I'm not sure whether there's general authority and there could be a condition imposed upon the applicant to have a peer review done.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Feinberg. So that's under Article, looks like 7 in your memo where you have outlined that. Is that the same area that you're talking about?
Yeah, yes.
Could you go on to your next point too? Because I just want to make sure we get through it before the hour slips away.
And the other point is the impact on water quality regarding phosphorus. And I think the provision is that there be no unreasonable runoff of phosphorus into the lake. And there's various standards and there's referral to DEP. So I just wonder why an applicant should not be required to have a zero impact on phosphorus to the lake. It's sort of like, groundwater and other similar, because phosphorus is something that we had, in the BLA, we have a Great Pond Management Plan of 10 years and we'll be spending millions of dollars in trying to deal with any dirt going into the lake, which includes phosphorus.
So that's under Article 1, looks like 2R.
Right, but that's in the minor subdivision, but it also was tracked in the major subdivision provisions.
Okay.
Those are my two major points, I think, that I was, and I guess there's also referrals, this is sort of just administrative, to a lot of work that the municipal engineer has to do. And does Belgrade have a municipal engineer? What do you, that's just a point of reference to me.
No.
So what happens if, it specifically says that the municipal engineer is going to do this and going to do that? So that's a point. The other point is in some of the thoughts in the cluster development, there's a lot of blanks that have to be filled in order for have an intelligent conversation on the impact of cluster development and where it applies. So how can we as the public react to something when it's not been decided about the number of lots and et cetera? And I also thought that 10% of open space in a cluster, in a subdivision, is too small, too little. I guess those are my major concerns.
Thank you, Mr. Feinberg. Okay, I'd like to make sure that others who might have some comments or concerns have a chance to air them out to us.
I'd like to echo his comment about a zero level of phosphorus entering the lake. Having just completed a watershed survey for the Veselonsky Lake, which included 7 towns, I learned a great deal about the impact of phosphorus. So I would really back his opinion.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to have something to say, comments to add? Not seeing any hands raised here or online. Okay. So maybe we could, I don't know, how does the board feel? Would you like to take these comments and then try to discuss them now?
I think we should, at a minimum, ask clarifying questions. And in case Mr. Dowd, he asked us a question, I think we should respond.
Sure. Okay, yeah. If that's okay, Mr. Dow, we'll try and take yours straight away.
That would be fine, thank you.
And do you have anything you'd like to?
Well, I was just gonna reiterate basically what Craig said earlier. This rewrite of the subdivision ordinance shouldn't impact at all a gravel pit that's been approved under the commercial development review ordinance. What may impact it is that particular ordinance itself. If you wanted to add a building that doesn't exist currently and wasn't part of your existing approval, would, and others should speak up if they disagree or think I'm wrong, but would require amending your existing approval for the building itself. And secondly, in terms of your, more specifically to your question, the planning board has the option of considering a waiver to a standard of that nature when site-specific conditions dictate. And so that would be an option available with regard to stormwater phosphorus runoff when you're in a self-contained area topographically, like a gravel pit. And it may be that we've already done that in at least one circumstance. That helps.
No, that helps.
Right, so does that make sense? Because what we started talking about initially, and I think Craig referenced this properly, was that the subdivision rewrite that we're talking about has to do with, and specifically with minors, with residential, right?
Yeah,
And yours, I think, would still be under a commercial.
right, I wasn't sure if the planning board was going in the direction of always requiring a professional engineer. That was more my general concern,
Okay.
but thank you for the clarification.
You know,
Sure.
that ordinance actually gives the board some flexibility to, depending on the scope of what's being proposed to, on larger scale developments, to require a professional engineer, but on smaller scale, not to, and rely on things like buffer strips and infiltration strip, which have some advantages because they don't have to be maintained unlike an engineered system. And also, as I've already mentioned, gives us the flexibility to consider site-specific circumstances where, for example, stormwater it's impossible, physically impossible for stormwater to reach a tributary to one of the lakes.
So does that help answer your questions?
Yes. Thank you.
You're very, very welcome. So hopefully that takes care of that one. Could we get back to the comment that was brought up initially, the one about the option to have 7 acres? Is that planning board okay to go back to that comment? You okay with that? So it was suggested that if there was an option to have that for the subdivider, that and not required, right, Greg? That's what you're saying. How does the planning board feel about that change? Is that acceptable? Is that
It's
something that,
acceptable to me.
Rich, do you have any opinion about that? I think the logic that was used seemed to make some sense.
Yeah, I see the logic, and I personally would not oppose it.
I would not oppose it either. At this point, I would certainly be fine with it, following the reasoning that was presented. Not that it's a done deal, but just to let people know how I'm feeling about it. So it'd be something in consideration.
I'm personally less certain, because I'm not, it's still not sure if I fully understand. So there would be, we would retain the current language, 6 acres, et cetera, as a definition of a minor subdivision, but we have this addendum option that you can go to 7 acres if the no lot smaller than 100,000 square feet. Is that what is being proposed?
No, I think what he's proposing is to have it 7 acres, so change 6 to 7, so the builder or the persons have the option to spread out 100,000.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, I
Yes.
don't want to interrupt, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, my suggestion was to change 6 acres to 7 acres. I mean, there wouldn't have to be 100,000 lots. There's no, you're not saying what the minimum lot size is, you're saying what the maximum is. But that would give a maximum that you could have 3 lots to protect the groundwater by having 1 dwelling unit per 100,000 square feet, the subsurface sewage and well for drinking water. Just 6 acres really restricts you. It really doesn't do any benefit to the groundwater. So I wasn't really saying an option, I was saying change the 6 to 7.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So there wouldn't be an option, it would be mandatory for 7?
It would be the definition of a minor would be not at 6 acres, it would be at 7 acres. So that means that the number of lots that you'd have, rather than, I think what he was saying is that rather than having lots divided in smaller amounts, the same number of lots might be larger if you wanted to.
If you want, but you could still have the 3 1-acre lots too.
Correct.
Just gives you an additional option.
That's what I understood from the comment.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, sorry. Yeah, it's not saying you have to have 7 acres. You could still have the minimum lot size for 3 acres. Someone had the land and wanted to protect the groundwater, the surface water, the drinking water. And they had the land, they could do 3 100,000 square foot lots. Or you could do 3, whatever the minimum lot size is now, 3 1-acre lots. Not saying you have to have 7 acres, but if you did, you could choose to divide it out.
George,
I remain uncertain about this. As you know, the minor subdivision is tailored on the basis that if we keep it to a minimal size and a minimal number of lots and no roads, not public, but any roads, then we can do away with some of the other requirements required of larger subdivisions, such as identifying and protecting wetlands, protecting areas of unique wildlife habitat like deer yards. And we've gone through this process of creeping the size larger and larger for a minor subdivision. And I would need to look at what, if any, provisions we would need to add for standards that a subdivision of 7 acres we should also consider if we're going to consider expanding it to 7 acres.
I see. How could we make progress on any changes like this? Some of these might require more debate and so on. Do we feel that taking these comments in, if it does require more discussion, that we manage this after this informational meeting? Is that what we're saying?
Well, at our last meeting, we decided the next meeting would be where we would make decisions on what, if comments we would incorporate and how,
Right,
and which we would not.
because we do have a timeline in which to operate. And November 18 would be the time that we do that.
Right, because on December 2nd or whatever, that meeting, we have to finalize the
Right,
draft. They can go to the select board on the 7th.
so I'd like to keep that in mind, not to make anyone so that people don't feel like their emotions or comments fall on deaf ears, just to know that we will make more substantive discussion on November 18th. So tonight we'll hear these things, try to clarify some things, get some pros and cons, and we'll have to do some more figuring. That's what it comes down to.
With specific regard to this proposal, I just need to go back and look at what we're requiring for submissions and performance standards for a minor subdivision versus a major subdivision, and which, if any, from the major subdivision should be included in a minor subdivision if we're going to keep on increase. I mean, this would be the third time we've increased the size.
Right. Yeah, let's consider it in greater detail on the 18th, but. Okay. So that was that one. So we hit up 2 of these so far. Mr. Feinberg had several points. I think we should probably talk a little bit about. First one was about, that I wrote down, was his suggestion about a peer review of all technical aspects be authorized by the planning board as a requirement. So peer review is, I think, the key thing there. How does the board?
I think he said a peer review paid for by the applicant, is what he said.
Oh, paid for by the applicant.
Yeah, so that's just an additional cost and struggle on anybody. And I just look back to when I started. With this stuff today, I would never be able to do it. So you're crippling the residents in Belgrade that have the access, but they can't afford to do it. You're just taking them out of the picture,
Maybe
Basically.
because they have to jump through too many loops.
and it's too expensive.
Right.
So the longtime residents being booted out. You know, no offense, I watch what the roads do with this zero phosphorus. You know, the towns are just dumping sand right into every brook and you know, they've come down on the Hewlett Road twice with an excavator. And Morris took 2 dump truck loads out of that little brook. That's all sand from the town. And now you're gonna go around and try to cripple everybody else. But the town's exempt. Don't get me wrong, I know that. But trying to make everybody else go zero phosphorus doesn't mean a thing until you fix the problem.
You know, another thing that I have personally been wondering about too is the use of recycled asphalt on camp roads. There's been a lot said on the internet, I've read about contamination of water with things that are not very good. And a lot of, well, there's been a few people in town that have been using recycled asphalt on their camp roads. And I wonder about how will that affect groundwater? And DEP is basically trying to keep this recycled asphalt out of landfills. And if they can get someone to put it on their camp road, it's less of it going into a landfill. But is anyone asking about how that's affecting the lakes? And some bad stuff.
Yeah, good, that's a good question. This particular point, not to take away from what you're
Right.
saying, has to do with phosphorus, and it was, the concern was not to have, or it was to have no increase in phosphorus. The comment reads, maybe should be a zero impact. Now it's substantiated by you. Underscored by you. I guess I'd like to hear some other comments, George.
Back to the first question with regard to whether or not the board should have the authority in this ordinance to be able to hire a consultant, which is what Mr. Feinberg is suggesting. To provide, since none of us have technical expertise in a lot of these areas. So that we could hire a engineer, a hydrogeologist, a soil scientist, or whoever we needed, depending on what the issue is that's above and beyond our heads. And as you may recall, in the bright side, we had battling consultants and technical review comments. But would have been nice. One option would have been for us to get, our own technical advisor. I thought that actually was in here. I thought, but I can't find it real quickly, that there was an authorization for us to hire a consultant, a technical consultant, at the expense of the applicant. I would just say this would be not new precedent by any means, that we have that authority under the commercial development review ordinance. We've never used it. Maybe we should have, in my opinion, in the case of Brightside, but we've never used it. That I personally have felt hamstrung at times, not having, when we're reviewing these complex applications, and none of us have technical expertise that's needed.
Peter, what would be, do you have a price range of what that would cost the applicant? I mean, I
It would
realize
very
it's
much-
all over the
It
board,
would
but
very much depend on the issue. But like, for example, in Brightside, we had battling estimates of stormwater and phosphorus runoff.
but that was commercial, correct?
That was commercial, but that's the example,
Yeah.
best example I could come up with off the top of my head. I would guess probably in the $5,000 to $10,000 range.
That's incorrect. They spent $30,000 to $40,000 on their engineer, so we think they're gonna get another one to go in and do that same work. 5,000.
Yeah, but somebody that is going to be objective and whose client is the town of Belgrade, not the applicant. Let's face it, consultants know who butters their bread.
Exactly.
Yeah,
I've
and so
seen it
that's like
many
doing a
times.
study, we can lean a study any direction you want. So now we have two different studies. So now we're just gonna be battling on again.
Probably one of the major things to think about is what gives the planning board the best tools to make a decision. Right? That's always, I think, one of the concerns, which is, I think, part of the reason why the suggestion to have a peer review being done by one of these professionals came up, is to help the planning board make that decision. I hear what you're saying, about the costs that go to the applicant. And that's difficult.
We don't have a resource through the Maine Municipal Association where we can tap in the, I don't know, something like pro bono will do something for the municipalities in terms of be a group that is pitched in by all the municipalities and that we can tap into it from time to time.
I am not aware of such a thing. It doesn't mean it doesn't exist, but I'm not aware of that.
They're not gonna do their job for free, but it was something that the Maine Municipal Association can have as a group and pay it all together from our fees. I'm not sure, it's just talking out loud, and I'm not minding of it.
I like the idea. I just
That,
don't know
that
if
will
it
solve,
exists.
that will solve the bias of having the applicant hiring someone that's gonna be on their side, or us hiring somebody that's gonna be on our side and having to pay double fees on legal terms just to have them in the rank
Mhm,
fighting for each other.
mhm.
So it will be an independent group that is providing legal resource and technical resource to all the municipalities. And no attachments to the town or the applicants.
That might be solving a slightly different issue in general. I think what we're trying to look at is how does this town's planning board get the peer review resources? And it's been suggested that we include language that a peer review, may be authorized by the planning board. The sticky point is paid by the applicant, right? And I think that's what can be very objectionable to people. And Craig brought up some good points. You've got many instances where people may not be able to afford that.
Mhm.
Anyway, probably not solved or resolved yet. But food for thought.
Another thing on that too, so then you're gonna be picking two different opinions. So you have Hodgson's, and then you make the applicant go hire somebody else, now you have two different opinions. Because this one's working for you just, so who's right?
Right, because then
So
in
we
the
hire
end,
a third one,
right,
where's it stop?
yeah, that's an interesting dilemma, right? I mean, and it becomes costly.
Yes.
Peter,
Yep.
just one
Go ahead.
final thought. I see this no different than the situations we found ourselves many times where the applicant has their attorney here. We don't take that attorney's word for it. We get our own legal opinion. Because that attorney is working for the applicant. They're going to err on the side of the applicant every time. And I see this the same way. We need to have access to the technical resources for us to be able to do our job well and uphold the standards of the ordinance. The same regard that we need the legal opinion on occasion.
And if you hire legal opinions, you can hire your own engineer.
Now, I want to move on, but I want to make sure to state this. As consultants work for whoever they're hired by, right? The idea for me of peer review is to be as objective as possible. I don't know that they all are. I'm just saying the idea is to be, when involved with peer review, they do being as objective as possible. And I can't say less likely to be biased, but to be well respected as a peer reviewer, you are supposed to be unbiased. For whatever that's worth. So
In theory.
in theory, correct. I did want to ask a question about the zero impact comment about phosphorus. So my comment is this, is I don't know how to do zero impact when there's development. When you're moving dirt, I don't know how to do that. So my question would be, how could the town ask for zero impact relative to the increase in phosphorus?
I'm not an expert by any means, but I went around throughout the watershed. I saw very bad examples of construction where there was no protection around the soil. There was no fence keeping the soil from running into the stream that it was right next to, for example. There are a lot of technical things that can be done while you're doing construction that keep the soil from running into any of the tributaries. And we have experts in our community that can help us do that. And it's true that the roads are the main problem. That's the other thing that I noticed. I think we need to address that as well. I looked at many culverts on some of the larger roads that absolutely need repair. So we do need to start with the biggest problem. You're absolutely right. And I'm here to get information. That's the only reason I'm here today. I have no expertise in anything. So I'm very interested in following up on this, though, having done that watershed survey and seeing how the major roads impacted and how development impacted.
Mhm.
And some people just would not, didn't care. All they want to do is build without any protection to the lake or even understanding how they might protect the lake. I do think that we have a responsibility as a community to inform people and to find whatever those procedures are, just give a couple of examples, that really do make a difference.
And those are actually already in place.
That what?
Those things are already in place.
I
They're
thought they
supposed to be
were.
doing that.
Yeah,
So you can't build it without anything next to a water body. So all that, what you just said is already in place. So
well, where I was, it wasn't, nobody was
Well,
abiding
then they
by
were in a violation.
Right. And that we found has been an issue at times, many times. So it's one thing to have things in language, right? It may be another thing to actually have 100% compliance.
it.
And the execution of those things that are outlined, that are in the ordinance that we say, maybe they're best practices that are outlined quite clearly by DEP or something like that. Quite frankly, it's a matter of trust when it comes from the planning board, when we sign on the dotted line that something is permitted. We are saying, we are in a relationship with the person to go do what we ask them to do. How well that is executed is beyond the scope of this planning board. We're not the enforcement authority. And I'm not sure how other language in the ordinance would have an impact on the execution of those things.
Actually, I think it's a matter of education. As I walked around the community doing this watershed survey, people were astounded to learn that grass is not a great deterrent for water runoff, or phosphorus runoff. So I think that most people don't have a clear idea of what these things are. I can only imagine that some of the developers didn't understand how this pile of dirt right next to this little stream was going to affect the stream.
Totally understand and agree, right? Yeah, it is a matter of education for sure, for sure. Yes, George.
It might be just worth noting for everybody's benefit, this rewrite of the subdivision ordinance, which would replace the 1988 version that we currently have with regard to phosphorus runoff, is a significant improvement. And I say that because, and this is noted in Katie Cogg's memo that was sent out. In 1988, the only lakes we were concerned about were Salmon and East Pond in terms of phosphorus. There wasn't even any, in our current ordinance, there aren't any phosphorus protection standards or protections to the lakes currently. This would incorporate DEP's up-to-date lake-specific standards for phosphorus export, which have come down as the lakes have continued to decline. The standards have been reduced accordingly. And it also relies on DEP's best management for stormwater runoff, phosphorus export, and soil erosion control. So, zero discharges under most circumstances, except maybe a situation like Mr. Dowd is described, where you have no runoff at all, is virtually impossible.
And while keeping that in mind, that's not to dissuade people from trying to attain the least amount of runoff
Right.
as can be. And maybe through greater education and greater communication with people as we do this, we can achieve a greater amount of compliance. That would be my hope. I do not know, but
Is the process that once the permit is given, that the code enforcement officer should be checking to make sure that whatever should be there is there? I mean, is that the process that should be there? I mean, I don't know if it was there before, but
That would be the way to do it.
that would be the way to do it. So
Mm-hmm.
whether that's in a job description or, I mean, I don't know that it comes in this ordinance, but that somewhere that be incorporated.
Well, generally-
Certainly a recommendation from the board that inspections be done.
Well, generally, you know, you have your septic inspection, and you have your plumbing inspection, so you have inspections going on through the, you know, Gary used to do both. So he was there, seeing everything through the building process.
As I'm thinking that somewhere gets added a specific one addressing phosphorus runoff and that the contractor's using the appropriate silt fences and hay bales and whatever.
At the appropriate means, right?
I mean, I assume that's probably what the appropriate thing is, but if you're going to inspect the septic, that there also be if there's a checklist, they have to check off whatever it is, that phosphorus runoff be added and addressed.
Sure. And
And I don't know how that it gets worked out through the town boards, but
yeah, I like the idea and wanted to mention too, an inspection could be done. There could be an event that causes a failure of some sort, like the day afterwards. So
Mhm.
despite the best of intentions, you still might have something that happens. And that type of follow-up, just to put it out there for everybody to hear, it's impossible for for a CEO in our town to go back and check every single one every single day, right? It's impossible, right? It still gets back to the matter of trust and whose responsibility is in the first place. Remember, we talked about the relationship we have with the taxpayers? When we sign on the dotted line and they go away, it is their responsibility. It is. To adhere to those things that we're talking about. So that's a complex thing. And we are hoping, trusting, encouraging people to do the right thing.
Is there such a thing really as a zero impact? Is there such a thing?
Probably not.
I mean, really?
In my mind, the answer would be no, and I'm not trying to be cynical.
No,
Whatsoever.
I'm saying really, when I hear the zero, I have a hard time understanding how when you do anything to land, it's not gonna make any impact on anything.
Right.
You know,
But there are a lot of things that you do to prevent water from flowing directly to the lake. There's
Right.
so many things and you just have to keep an eye on it. And the more that we all do, as each individual, the closer we get to that.
yeah, I'm noticing because I've lived in the town and my roots go deep in this town, that I've just been observing the changes around the lakes lately. And I'm noticing people hiring the mosquito bandito to spray around their camps for ticks or mosquitoes or whatever. So how is, that's not making any, that's a zero impact? I mean, there's so many things that could impact the environment. There's one, recycled asphalt being used. Someone taking coal tar and sealing their driveway. When it dries and it becomes fine particles, over time when it starts to wear, that's gonna eventually find its way somewhere. I mean, that's why I have a hard time understanding how anything can be a real zero impact.
Yeah, agreed. And maybe I think what we're talking about, and we might be closer than we're thinking right now, is that even though it might be unattainable and unrealistic to say zero,
Right,
there are many things that can be done.
right.
And we
I
want to
agree with
encourage
you.
and educate as much as we can. So striving for that is good. Trying to attain the ideal, reaching for that perfect thing would be awesome. But doing nothing is certainly wrong, right?
I
Doing
wonder-
doing something would be great.
I wonder if an incentive could be thrown out there for somebody who wants to develop to try to obtain the best with some kind of an incentive. I don't know, just throwing it out there,
It's a good idea.
like a green thinking.
I don't know if this would work and maybe others can take it and run with it, but, with residents around the lake, they participate in the Lake Smart program.
There's
right?
a-
They do that.
You
We
can-
all have that.
You know, so that's what one could advertise that they do, is what we do, so.
But
If that's an
what I'm saying,
incentive.
If there's subdivision in their laws, in their, when they write up the subdivision in the deed, put in something saying that, you know, we're all agreeing, we're not gonna be spraying for ticks and mosquitoes.
Or whatever the
Oh,
case
we're
may
not
be,
gonna be
right?
spraying pesticides, herbicides, we're not putting herbicides on our lawns.
Mhm.
You know, to me, that's an environmental, that's really helping the environment,
Mhm.
because the aquatic life, it's all factored in, you know,
Sure.
if they're using chemicals all around the lake to just get rid of pests.
Yeah.
Or a weed on their lawn, you know.
It's all related, isn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and like you were saying with the dirt, you know, I totally agree with that, but I think there's other things that have to be looked at too. Some states have banned the use of coal tar sealants on driveways.
Mm.
Because when it dries over time, that finds its way into water, and they're finding that's a big pollutant.
I see. Time check on everybody.
Yeah, just one comment might be that if you have someone who's developing within the watershed, that a requirement that they make their property lake smart, which means they would have to have a buffer. They would have to do the things that, when you do these watershed surveys, as we've done and Jan has done, you see them and you're like, so any new development is going to need to be lake smart certified, which is, you know, a program throughout the state. Maybe something you want to consider.
I just hate to see, on the other hand, saying all this, I hate to see more barriers put up for people who do want to develop their land. That's why I said maybe it would be a better approach to make incentives rather than another barrier.
Well, Lake Smart is an incentive, it's not an barrier. We encourage people to, to learn and to do what they want to do for their land, but knowing what's good for the lake. And so it's very doable, it doesn't have to be expensive. It's more of an educational aspect with an application piece. So yeah, if you got that in there, that would be great.
But I just, like I said, I hate to see more barriers for the small developer, because, I mean, it's just gonna be another expense, and like Craig said, I mean, an expert is the person with whom you agree. Okay, that's the definition of an expert. Okay.
Is that in Webster's? Is that-
That is the definition. So, you know, you can hire someone to agree with you.
Yep.
And everyone's gonna be just at a standstill fighting over something.
Yeah.
And that's why I say, maybe we could be creative and think of incentives.
Yes, I
rather than
agree.
Another, a barrier, a hoop for someone to jump through.
I'm with you. So I need to interrupt here and say, I just want to time check. It's now 7 o'clock. We've been at this for an hour. Anthony, is our time frame for the informational hearing an hour, or is it longer than?
It was now.
It wasn't an hour. So I just want to make sure to put that out, because I do want to pay attention to people's time. We've all given up much of your time to even come here tonight, so thank you very much. Before we wrap it up for this informational session, Serge, do you have anything you wanted to say tonight for first? You know, I didn't want to put you on the spot, but I didn't want to have you come in and then just have everybody going like, what the heck, right? You know, so, are you okay?
Very good.
Okay, great. So are there any other comments? Is there from Matt? You're very welcome, Maddie. Thank you. So there's a comment of thanks for the conversation, if I read it quickly. So thank you. Before we go, anything else before we go?
I was not sure if we were trying to wrap the language around the zero impact. I don't know if you were trying to look for that. I guess my thought into it is that we can aim for zero impact by doing all the stuff, mitigating issues through Lake Smart code. Well, we can use as language.
I think so. So the goal wasn't to necessarily develop final language tonight on this, but to take the concepts of and the real root of the comments,
Sure.
incorporate them, knowing that we have our next meeting on the 18th. we would then hopefully have some good decisions. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Perfect.
I have,
I got a question. I don't know whether you, oh, somebody else.
No, you're up.
Okay. I don't know if Julie, when she does a minute, so we'll know who is here or something. But I'd be interested to know who is speaking tonight. I don't think everybody identifies themselves.
I'm Carol Johnson.
Thank you. And could we just go around the room and just make sure to say yourself? So Tom,
Thomas Stout,
thank you.
Dave Wendell.
Anonymous.
Okay,
Fred Perkins.
thanks, Fred.
I'm Janet Townsend, and I just represent President Zelensky.
Thank you. And then we had people who were here virtually, and Paul Feinberg was one person. And Mr. Feinberg, you had another comment before we head out for the wrap this up?
He's muted.
I have one comment, sorry, I muted myself. Is that what started me thinking was when the current ordinance or the draft ordinance talks about an unreasonable impact regarding phosphorus. And I thought that was way too loose, way too subjective. So I started to think, well, maybe it can't be a significant impact. But I would ask the planning board to look at that language, and I think it needs some revisions, because to leave it as an unreasonable impact is just too loose. So the idea of a zero impact was to stimulate a conversation, which it did.
It did. Yeah, thank you. Appreciate that. All right, so we've heard some great comments tonight. Thank you all. Thanks for your time and consideration and energy put into this. You're more than welcome to stick around for other exciting planning board stuff. But we're going to move on to the next few items for us.
In case there's nothing on TV.
Yeah.
Thank you. The work you did on this is really nice to see all the environmental impacts incorporated in this document.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.
So these are next meeting, one of the things on the agenda will essentially be a work session with the comments that we had tonight.
That is correct.
And probably the public could come to, obviously the public can attend that meeting. What they may not, and I don't know the answer to this, be able to provide further comment that I wouldn't want to shut people out, but at the same time, we can't have another public meeting. It's really a work session for us to finalize based on the topic.
So for everybody's awareness, on the 18th, we're going to be incorporating input and trying to make decisions on these things so that we have a final revised ordinance on the December 2nd, where we would say, consider a final approval of the ordinance from the November 4th meeting participants. Okay. It's a little awkward there, but December 2nd is when we need to finalize some stuff.
Welcome to the select board.
Thank you.
Yeah, exactly. So, all right, thank you, everybody.
Thank
Good.
you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
I'm gonna see Joanna in a couple weeks.
Oh.
Jo-
I love-
Josie turns 1.
I know. Bye-bye.
See you. Hey. All right, so that was under new business. That was the public discussion of the proposed subdivision ordinance rewrite. Next up is B, discussion of the commercial development review ordinance amendments addressing the decommissioning solar, wind, and telecommunications infrastructure and phosphorus export standards. So phosphorus raises its head again. So this is on the commercial development review ordinance. So first of all, Anthony, thank you for all the examples that were provided to the board. We had several examples. Was it Chelsea, Reedfield, something? I remember reading them. And
Katie Pog.
Katie Cog had one. And is perhaps Joel with us at this point?
Yeah, Joel is with us.
Okay, great. Thanks, Joel, for all your help on this.
Hi there, you're welcome, no problem, glad to help.
Excellent. When I was going through the various examples, As was noted, the town of Chelsea's area, which was the most detailed plan, did provide a lot of, I think, a lot of good stuff, actually, when it comes to, in my opinion anyway, we were talking about the decommissioning of the solar stuff, which that seemed to have been one of the bigger areas of concern for us. And seeing how we can apply some things to other aspects too. I'm not sure, how did other planning board members feel about the various ordinances that we saw, examples that we saw?
I would agree with those.
Details?
Which is, it seems to me Craig Reedfield is also based on the KD Cog template, and they tweaked it
Yeah, they tweaked it to, you know,
to their preference.
they have got, what was it, 130, 25, I'm trying to find it. On the decommissioning, you know, we don't want to just do 100% because everything goes up.
Right,
So 130 or 150%. I'd be fine with 130. They also had 20% coverage. You know, 20% impervious, basically. Kind of like that as well. And then-
oh, yeah,
And then, I believe the Sharon's going that route too.
Yeah, Reedfield was 150% of
Yeah,
that.
I think so, yeah.
Decommissioning fund. Yeah.
Chelsea was 125.
yeah. And I think we did talk about this before. Another detail about decommissioning was triggered when I think the ordinances said no, what did they say, zero electricity is generated, right? And so I think we talked about, is the key term generated or should it be sale?
Sale.
I agree. I happen to like the idea of sale. Does it, anybody else feel the same way? I think, Craig, we talked about this on the way out the other night. Yeah.
Yeah, because it can still generate electricity, but still not be of value. of anything.
Right.
Isn't that what we were talking about?
Yes, yeah,
And
exactly.
I think it's important to remember this is under the commercial development review ordinance, so the sale of electricity would indicate that there's some commercial activity going on.
Right, that's a great point. I really like that. So I guess I would offer up that would be something that we seem to have some consensus around, that if we did agree to it, that no matter which one we selected, that term sale be applicable and not generated. Go ahead, George.
Reedfield is, I think what we're trying to accomplish in today's meeting is decide which of any of these ordinances is the foundation we want to build our decommissioning standards on, not anything else, not siting, not construction,
Right.
et cetera. And I'm fine with Reedfield. I kind of like, I guess I prefer the KV cog, but there's only subtle differences. Like Craig noted, I think 100% of the total cost when you're doing a financial assurance is probably not enough, because I know in the solid waste world and the hazardous waste world where these kind of mechanisms are used, they're almost always inadequate by the time it comes time to decommission. And so you need some provision for inflation, and you need a provision for the cost estimates being usually coming under what they actually turn out to be. So whether it's 125% or 150%, as Chelsea and Reedfield did. But, you know, as a base line place to start our discussion, I'm okay with either KV Cog or Reedfield. I think KV Cogs is a little clearer and a little easier to work with, is my sort of preference, but I think either could serve as a foundation. I do think, though, one of the things we need to talk, besides just the details of decommissioning, is the applicability of the commercial development review ordinance to solar farms in general. Because, for example, this is what was provided to us back in, at our October 21st meeting. KV Cogs is based on a definition of utility scale solar facilities. Chelsea uses a very different definition, as does Reedfield. And so I think we need to know who we're attempting to regulate and what size. I mean, I like some of the exemptions that Chelsea has. But I guess in that regard, I do have a question for Joel, if I may.
Let's do that.
Joel, could you explain the definition of utility scale solar facility? I honestly don't know squat about electric generation. And I don't know what a 0.10 megawatt facility looks like, how big it is, or anything of that nature. Leave it at that.
Yeah, sure. I have a useful document which I might be able to share, which gives a kind of a visual, or at least a look at the different scales in terms of megawatts and what that relates to in terms of size. I think we tried to say utility scale so that it definitely kind of captures these ones that are these facilities that are definitely something that you'll be reviewing under commercial review, rather than reasonably sizable residential uses. I'll see if I can track down that specific document, which just does give an idea of the scale about how much is generated per size of a facility, and I'll see if I can share that with you guys. That might give some clarity.
Okay, so that's the same thing that Reedfield's saying, because Reedfield is just going after the size. They're using the size rather than saying utility scale. They're breaking it down into sizes. And they're also defining a solar farm, which would be the same
I
thing.
can't remember, are they using acres?
Oh, I can't remember. Let's see.
Anyway, your point's well taken, Greg.
Yeah. So if we get that from Joel, would that help?
Yeah, I think so. Although, as Craig's suggesting, we can always substitute what Reedfield's doing for a definition of, what is this ordinance going to apply to? What kind of facility, how big? And what is it not going to apply to? Because if you look at the commercial development review ordinance, we have an applicability section, so we got to put something in there. Then we have an exemptions section, and I think we need to put something, my personal preference is I think we need to put some things in there, like exempting rooftop
Right.
facilities.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I was quickly trying to scan the Reedfield one, Craig, to see if I could catch.
It's under definitions, so. Solar system, small scale, also known as an accessory scale system. It's less than 3,000 square feet. Solar farm is under solar energy system, which is whose physical size based on the total airspace projected over the ground is equal or greater than 4 acres, 174,240 square feet, and or that generates a nameplate capacity of 1 megawatt or greater. Okay, that's utility size.
1 megawatt or greater, so it'd be bigger than this, than the KV5. Because it's 1/10 of a megawatt.
For utility.
I understood it right, from what we saw
Yeah.
or heard, yeah. Joel, did you hear that, what Craig was talking about?
I think so, yeah. I was just, yeah, so the definition that we've been going off is ground-mounted photovoltaic project larger than 0.1 megawatts in capacity. So that's, yeah, I don't know if I could share the, I mean, so 0.1 megawatts represents what, 100 kilowatts, and the kind of average household rooftop solar system is somewhere in the region of 6.5 kilowatts. So if you get the idea of that scale, you can still have a pretty sizable solar installation under 100 kilowatts. 0.1 megawatts being the threshold is quite the size.
Okay.
So far, 0.01.
All right. So what's our next step then on this?
Well, the only other thing I would add, in sort of, the view from 30,000 feet up in the air is, we need to make sure that whatever definition we use of decommissioning, it's consistent with the statute that was passed last spring. Went into effect in September. So that in statute I have it right here, but it has a pretty detailed definition of what decommissioning consists of, which differs somewhat from the one in KV Cog and in Reedfield. I didn't look at Chelsea. And I think to be current, I think we should, at minimum, be similar to that in state law.
Do you think, George, would there be any wisdom to putting sort of a blanket statement that the decommissioning standard must at a minimum meet state requirements in the, just anticipating that those requirements may change over time? So we're not-
Well, that would be one way to skin that cat, yeah. There is somewhat of an issue sometimes of having, and Rich, I know you know something about this, having unspecified references. I guess the state law doesn't apply. Never mind, I forget that. I was thinking of when you have a reference or a citation of a document in a town ordinance, you have to specify the date of that ordinance, that document that you're citing, rather than just having it open-ended.
Yeah, and if they amended the document, that doesn't automatically change your ordinance.
Anyway, my basic point is, whatever we come up with, it should be consistent with state law.
Agreed.
Well, and, we'll have Joel's assistance to some extent on this, and then also remember that our attorneys are going to be reviewing this, early January.
Yep.
So that will provide another safeguard to ensure that we're not in any sort of conflict with state statute.
That's good. Go ahead, Tom.
I have a question, it's probably already been addressed, but on the guarantees from the business world, I've seen bankruptcy filings that came back at a company I was working with, and basically the bankruptcy judge came in and grabbed money we'd already collected. So where I'm going with that is, are these guarantees that are put down, are they protected in a bankruptcy filing? Or is potentially the escrow going to look like, oh, there's a pot of cash that we can give to somebody else?
I see, yeah. I saw you nodding your head.
Oh, I was agreeing,
Yeah.
in the sense that that's exactly what happened with the abandoned paper mill landfills.
Yep.
In Old Town and in the Dolby landfill up in East Millinocket.
Yep.
Those paper companies walked away and the state ended up with the liability. Their financial assurance mechanism weren't worth the paper they were written on. They used primarily letter of credits. And the state ended up with all the environmental as well as the liability as well as the closure costs.
So how can we avoid that? What language can we use that does not just rest on sort of the flimsy language where measures would not be taken? Help us out.
Well, I like the wordage of the credit that you were just talking. The other two, the bonds seem pretty.
Yeah.
Pretty secure, at least. I don't know. What about a bond? Can they come in and grab a bond as well? That's given to a town that has money sitting there.
I'm not an attorney, so.
Yeah, no, it's the letter of credit because it's sort of the lowest cost upfront to the developer. That was the weak link in the state system.
So like in Reedfield's thing, under paragraph D, demonstration in the form of a performance bond, surety bond, letter of credit is the weak link, you're saying?
Yeah, that's the state experience.
Yeah. So I'm not sure what other form of financial assurance. I don't know, perhaps Joel would know, or Anthony, if you have any ideas about language that we could point to and use.
I don't, I mean, and Tom may know more about this than I would, but some of the ordinances speak to, instead of a letter of credit, an irrevocable letter of credit. Does that give any added assurance, Tom, in your mind?
I'm not sure. I mean, you need somebody specialized, probably like a bankruptcy attorney.
Yeah.
But I think I think we can all see the probability that one of these solar farms goes bankrupt at some point.
Yeah.
Technology change, market changes, whatever.
Yeah. Exactly. So I guess my only concern is to just request that we use the language that can help us out the best to protect the town's assets. So whether it's the bond language, I guess I'm thinking the letter of credit thing is probably the weakest language in there. And I don't know, whether it's performance bond, surety bond, or anything else, as long as we have something.
And it might be a good question for the attorneys, once we turn this over to the attorneys.
Yep.
If they have a suggestion for anything that's a little more stable.
So in the time that we have, do we want to, are we ready to make any sort of a move or a decision about what to promote for decommissioning?
Well, I think we need to tonight, at a minimum, decide which of these we're gonna use as our foundation.
Yep.
And you know, what definition we're going to use for decommissioning. And then, you know, I mean, there's some other issues that, you know, I thought of that may, once we get into the weeds, but I think fundamentally, at a minimum, we need to decide whether we're gonna go with Reedfield's two-tiered system or, you know, a single system like KV Cog is proposing. And, you know, I'm fine with either. I think both of those are a little better, superior to Chelsea's myself, but
The, my way of thinking, my way of reading, I liked the outline look of KV Cog. It allowed me to go through step by step and understand a little bit clearer than on the paragraph form, but that's very minor. I think it's just the way I went through things. So of the two, I might lean a little bit towards the KV Cog one myself at this point. And after our discussion, I think, Craig, with Joel here, talking about whether it's the, you know, the example of the size thing to allow that definition to be in place. So I don't know. Both Sarah, welcome back. We haven't seen you in a bit. Thank you for being here. I know it's been a busy couple weeks. Have you had a chance to go through these?
I just really skimmed them,
Okay.
and I tend to side with you. But it's just the presentation of it mostly.
Rich, do you have any preference? I mean, they're all very close in a lot of ways.
Yeah. I'm fine with the KV cog one, but with modifications as we
Yeah,
talk about the cost of decommissioning guarantee or whatever. 100% probably isn't really where we need to be.
right, something more than,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So it sounds like, you know, deciding which one of these things would be the basis. I think it's time to do something myself. Are we ready to make a motion on one of them?
So it doesn't on the KV cog, I screwed all my papers up and unorganized. In terms on the decommissioning cost. Weren't they talking about subtracting salvage?
Yeah, I have an issue with that.
Yeah,
That is.
Yeah, I mean, there are details in each one of these like that, that I think we should discuss. Like the, 125%, 150%. Another one, Chelsea has a soil sampling requirement at the time of decommissioning that I think it's worth discussing a little bit. In terms of whether or not there were any hazardous substance discharges during the course of the life of that facility. Those kinds of details, but I think we could make Reed Field or the KV cog work with those once we get into the weeds.
I think so too.
So it doesn't matter which, you guys think that's more organized,
Maybe it's minor.
if we're only doing the decommission portion, right?
Correct,
Yeah,
Correct.
yeah.
And we're gonna put our own verbiage into it.
correct. So if everybody's in agreement with at least making a decision on deciding which of these to use, I would entertain a motion for one.
I guess I'll make a motion that we start as a foundation, the KV cog definition of a solar facility and
Decommissioning.
their draft decommissioning language.
Okay. We got a motion for KV cogs. A second. Thank you, Rich. Any more discussion? Okay, all those in favor will do a roll call. So George?
Yeah.
Yes, Sarah?
Yes,
Yeah, Craig?
Yes.
Yeah, Rich? Yes. Yeah, and Peter, yes, so that'd be what? 5 in favor, none opposed. KV cogs it is. Joel, thank you very much for that. And we're gonna now get into some weeds, I think. I'll just, my plug, I think we already talked about it, strike generated and put in the word sold. You know, those cases where they're talking about that decommissioning. Are we all in agreement about that?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Great, that was my one plug so far. So what other things we want to talk about for details? I think on that first page, down on 1, 2, 3, 4, paragraph 4, they're talking about the total cost of decommissioning. They're at a 100% and then comma less salvage value. I think I heard us talking about striking the language less salvage value. Is that, are we in agreement on that part? And maybe we could arm wrestle over the value to place for the total cost of decommissioning. Key points are knowing that there is inflation and things are undervalued at present day sometimes, right?
Yeah.
So,
And related to that is, there is a provision for inflation at the third page, bottom third page, that the owner of the facility provides the planning board with a revised removal cost estimates prepared by a professional engineer every 5 years. So that also captures the inflation.
okay. Every 5 years.
I was gonna suggest what Chelsea does, which is 125% of the cost estimate.
it seems reasonable if you're redoing every 5 years.
Yeah, if you didn't have any other mechanism for taking inflation into account, I would say would need to be higher, but that's just a, judgment on my part.
See, out of the things that I read, 100% did not cover it. 150 seemed a little steep, so I was looking at 125 myself, 125%. Especially now that we've talked about the every 5 years part being sort of a live discussion about what's going on with that decommissioning thing. So it would not put this at risk for decommissioning without that, right? So,
Oh, you know what? I'm sorry. I was wrong about the inflation. The inflation language is in Chelsea's, and I think we would need to add that.
now on just so you know, on KV Cogs on the third page on paragraph 4, it says the applicant may propose securing the necessary financial assurance in phases as long, oh, that's about assurances. As long as the total required financial assurance is in place a minimum of 5 years prior to the expected end of useful life. So, okay, so that wouldn't cover that. So taking the language that you're talking about from Chelsea, inserting it in KV Cogs would be the mechanism.
Right. It's under their section for, financial guarantees.
Or decommissioning. You said there was Reed Fields?
Chelsea.
Yes, I'm sorry. Okay,
All right, and I can read it, it just simply, well, I read it before.
yeah, I'm good with that.
George, for my benefit, would you read that one more time so I know?
Yeah, and I can show you where it is.
Yeah.
If that would help. It reads, it's basically. Page numbers. The owner of the facility, why don't I just show it to you?
Is it number 2 under section 5?
Yes, it is. Mr. Down had a.
Oh, yes, go ahead.
So I wasn't clear, are you gonna leave the language in that the applicant may propose securing the necessary financial assurance in phases? I mean, personally, I'd say you should eliminate that.
Oh, based on the KV Cog template, which was under
Under section 4.
section.
Paragraph 4.
Yeah, that was where I was just getting at, right? I had seen 5 years when I was skimming it and that caught my eye. So I'm glad we talked about this. Because this is about the financial assurances part that you're bringing up, correct?
Correct.
So are you suggesting that that is not the correct mechanism for us?
I think personally you should eliminate it because I think one of the standard development tricks is they basically load the profit, let's say, into the person developing the solar farm, let's say. And you have another operation managing the solar farm, so all the profits are loaded up front. And then potentially, you've got a shell basically 5 years down the road.
Yeah, let's see the money there and some sort of bond or the two methods that we're going with.
Yeah.
All at once, not in phase, because I was thinking the same thing. Wouldn't they go bankrupt by the time
Right?
they don't have them?
Yeah, because sometimes they magically don't, right? I think it's a very good notion. Thank you, Mr. Dowd. How do the board members feel about
I
that?
agree with that.
Striking that? Okay. So that was under, Anthony, did you see that, number 4?
Yeah, so they'll have to have that money up front. That's what you're saying.
That's what we're saying, and we're also suggesting to strike the language under paragraph 4 there, which the last sentence, I think, Mr. Dowd, tell me if I'm in the right one, it says, the applicant may propose securing necessary blah, 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 that one. Right?
Correct.
So ends with the applicant and begins with the applicant and ends with wind energy facility, that last sentence in 4. Did you find that one?
So this is under the solar template?
Under the solar template, and it is,
I see the sentence that begins, the applicant may propose. So
Yeah.
is it just striking just that one sentence or the sentence that follows as well?
uh,
The financial assurance sentence.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
just that
exactly.
sentence, Anthony.
Yep.
Because we still want the town to have access to
Okay,
the
got
financial mechanisms,
Okay.
right,
I believe.
yep. Okay. What other details do we want to get into?
Well, and I already mentioned this, but paragraph little I or little 1, we need to mesh that with the definition of decommissioning in state law. Because there are some differences, including the what depth do you remove equipment from, things of that nature.
Okay,
And Anthony, I have a copy of that if that would be helpful.
Sure.
so with the KB cog language about decommissioning. Let me just say this, there are 3 things in here. One has to do with the solar template, second has to do with the cell tower, and the third has to do with wind energy template. Are we all clear on that? We're kind of, we're focusing, I think, on the decommissioning language, but for our conversation, are there any other things, details within the solar area of concern?
I have some, a couple.
Okay,
You want me to go ahead or?
please do.
So first, in the second paragraph of double little I, there's an explanatory note, and
Oh, I see.
that deals with recycling or beneficial reuse of a site, and I guess recycling of the components. The one, I have a problem with it being explanatory note, because that means it's not enforceable. It's not a requirement, it's just informational. So I would do away with it as a note. And I would beef it up a little bit by requiring recycling to the maximum extent feasible by the market. We don't know what the market will be. Right now, it's, I guess, pretty iffy. And also I would add there, no waste from the decommissioning is to go to the town transfer, town solid waste facility.
I like that.
George, you said no waste, go to the transfer facility.
Yeah, yeah, so we don't have a facility dumping panels that are, technologically out of date, bringing them to the transfer facility. That's in terms of our license, that's probably an unlikely scenario, but you know, other components might not be appropriate to be taken there.
Right.
So Jordan, where it says the applicant may provide, or am I understanding you correctly that you think that should say must provide?
Yeah. And then at the end of that paragraph, add some language to the effect of no waste is to go to the town solid waste facility.
Okay.
And then at the end of paragraph little 3I, the plan, the itemization of costs that are going to be part of the financial mechanism, or the cost of decommissioning. Let's see, that's supposed to be updated. Actually, maybe that's redundant. Actually, you know, what we were talking about before,
Yeah.
I see is Chelsea uses every 5 years. Here, it's every 3 years, so maybe we don't need the Chelsea language at all. But anyway, I was going to suggest adding to the end of that paragraph, and it'd be submitted to the planning board for approval. And the last comment I had was at the very end, on the next page, I guess it's part of 4 or little IV, transfer of ownership. I think we need something that states that a new owner needs to demonstrate to planning board's satisfaction that they meet the financial assurance requirements and earlier, I guess. Yeah, financial insurance mechanism.
It's a great point. To be very clear about it, it would be, I think, a good thing.
Yeah. Because when I talked with Steve Bucksbaum about, I mean, he knows a lot about the actual market and how these facilities work. He thinks that a lot of these facilities will change hands multiple times over the course of their lifespan. And we've already seen that already in some of the larger facilities in Maine with wind power.
Yeah. Yeah, so I had a question, but it's maybe more legal rather than anything else. I don't know that we need to bring it up here, but perhaps after we get done.
Those were the only suggestions I had at this point.
Thank you, George. Does anybody else have anything in the solar template language that we need to kind of wrestle with? How about in the cell tower template area?
My thought, Peter, was to model that after what we come up with for solar,
Yeah. I like that.
tweaking it for, you know, the fact that it's different technology, but the basics are pretty similar.
Yeah. Same for wind energy.
I would think so. And it really comes down to the strength of the financial assurance mechanisms, how much money to set aside, ensuring that it's updated on a periodic basis for inflation.
I noticed the KV cog language for the cell tower template talks about on bond for removal section that's highlighted, it says prepared by a professional civil engineer license plan in Maine every 5 years from the date of the planning board's approval. So I only mention that because it's seems to be a different frequency than on the first one, 3 years.
Yeah,
Anyway, whatever. I can live with some minor tweaks, you know.
Well, I mean, if you folks just want to say, no, we're gonna make it 3 years or 5 years consistently throughout.
yeah, I think it should be consistent throughout.
I mean, go ahead and let me know and I'll massage the language.
Would we decide on, is it 3 years in solar, right?
At the end of paragraph 3 there, it does say 3 years must be updated every 3 years.
Yeah,
And that's the cost.
right.
Yes.
What do you think of that, Craig? Do you think 5 years is adequate?
It's a lot, but, then again. So, like you said, the cell tower pretty much stays on the property, so. And a lot of them are on residential property. Solar farms, like you said, I think they're gonna trade hands.
Yeah.
Quickly, so with 3 years on the solar farm, I'm fine. It's not that.
I was just wondering, I mean, 3 years is pretty frequent. Whether,
Yeah, that's really, I mean, the solar farm, I'm fine with it, because you never know when they're gonna change, you know. The cell tower sits there and it's, same ownership for the most part.
So in that, it may not require the same level of the frequency having to be the same, right? Because it's a different beast, is what you're
And
saying.
you're only talking one unit, not multiple.
Yeah.
Probably
See,
doesn't change.
the state experience, and, you know, my information is dated based on when I retired, but is that wind farms change ownership, have changed ownership a number of times, the big ones that the state has licensed.
Wind farms, I thought we were talking about the.
Oh, I thought we were trying to reconcile the two.
The two are the cell tower template talks about,
5 years.
yeah, 5 years.
Oh, okay.
Versus the solar was 3.
I'm just over here in La La Land.
So I'm not trying to split hairs. I
Yeah,
get
no,
what
no,
you're
no,
saying,
I'm sorry. I got the
But-
wrong end of this.
But we may have different beasts to deal with, and that may be enough. to
Yeah, no,
say-
I agree with Craig's analysis in terms of telecommunication towers.
That's easy, we just leave the language as is.
I think so. And then just to kind of beat this a little bit more, so the wind energy one, right? I was just kind of quickly scanning through it. Is there anything there that's that we need to discuss?
See, I'm more concerned about
Actually,
wind power facilities and their decommissioning than I am telecommunication towers. Partly because the existing language for that in the ordinance, in the commercial development review ordinance, basically has it such that the town can pick up the costs. Well, I don't think that's right. Town should, under no circumstances, have to pick up the cost.
right.
This, I think, fixes that.
Yeah.
But to get back to my prior point, even though I was talking about the wrong type of facility, is wind power facilities have changed, in Maine have changed hands a number of times, the large ones that have been licensed by DEP. You know, whether that's because of corporate takeovers or whatever, I don't really know, but that's been the reality of that marketplace.
So would it be wise for us to consider having some language in there that says that that for the wind energy thing, that there's some frequency that whoever owns it is telling the town what the cost of that
Yeah,
decommissioning.
and
would
I
be.
think it should be similar to the solar farm.
So let's do that. Can we do that, Anthony?
Yeah.
So since solar is 3 years, so have some language that's like that in the wind energy one. For every 3 years.
Every 3 years. And we're gonna take out the salvage and go to 150% and everything,
125.
125, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And get rid of the letter of credit, parental guarantee.
Right.
So we're just gonna use performance bond and charity bond on all of it. Is that? Or at least the wind and solar.
I think we should use it on all of it, just be consistent that way, because I think what we talked about was that we've got some weak link language otherwise that puts us at risk.
Mhm.
So let's be as strong as we can be. Okay. So we wanted to talk about which one to use. We did that. We talked about decommissioning language, which we've done that and applied it to the three areas of concern. Is there anything else we need to talk about on this particular topic? We have, if so, we have covered item B on our on our agenda. We still have some more business to attend to.
So what I'll do, just so you guys know, is I will take the PDI template, incorporate the changes that we talked here tonight, distribute it to you for your review. I'll make sure Joel gets a copy of it as well, just in case he has some input on where we may have gone astray.
I did want to ask Joel if he's heard any of our discussion that gives him pause, since we don't know what we're doing.
We're tossing language around, Joel. Are we going astray?
No, this is, I think you're on the right path here. I think the idea of this is you can make some of those tweaks and make sure that it all, lines up logically if we were talking about different kind of structures. The only thing that just jumped into my head is if we're talking about, especially with the solar ones, when it comes to the language, I think the state language in that decommissioning state thing talks about 24 inches below grade. And they basically just put these big steel girders in. And if they wanted to, they could just potentially just cut them off and just leave certain parts of them still like buried in the fields under that language. So like full removal would be something I would encourage for the solar development at least.
Very good point.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, that's a good point, because I assume we can be more stringent, we just can't be less stringent.
Yeah, so.
Absolutely, yeah, correct.
So in the state language where it says decommissioning means the physical removal of all, we could just put means the full physical removal and then take out the depths.
Right. Thank you, Joel.
Yeah, I've also heard them talk about if they're underground line conduits, deep, if they're deeper than that 24 inches, they'll just leave them there because it's too deep to be triggered for removal.
Okay. That's great. I think we made a lot of progress. Thank you.
I'd point out, I think George, we didn't just address it, I guess, but George's amendments to the phosphorus export standards, I think are appropriate and fine.
Oh, are you saying, where are we?
Well, we just did the decommissioning solar, wind, and telecommunications. And then it says, and phosphorus export standards.
Mhm.
That's where we're upgrading the ordinance
Oh,
to the current standard.
yes, thank you.
To state standards, right?
Just, right.
Right, it would be consistent with the subdivision ordinance.
Thank you. Thanks for making clear on that. Thank you very much. Okay. So thank you for pointing that out, Rich. If that's the case, have we discussed everything we need to on item B, which is decommissioning solar, wind, telecommunications infrastructure, and the phosphorus export standards? We good?
I think we're gonna.
Okay, it's 5 of 8. Before we go any further, does anybody need a bio break? So we still have here from, it looks like a potential multifamily dwelling application. Yeah.
I think a bio break would be.
Yeah. May we take a 5-minute bio break? So we'll be back here at 8. Thank you. Great. There was a call. So do people have the this particular multifamily dwelling ordinance? I don't. Craig does, Rich does, I think in Sarah may, I don't know.
Yeah, I have one more thing.
Thank you.
Thanks.
It's right here.
Near what?
Just down from Horse Point Road.
Route 8.
Route 8, right north of Camp Morgan.
I can see it.
Yeah, so this property is right next to the Camp Motor.
Oh, that's the ball field.
That's the
Okay,
ball field.
gotcha. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cause I live across the street from you. Not far.
Yeah. It's owned by the Watson Family Farm LLC. So just past the baseball field, there's a 3 buildings. I kind of did just a rudimentary aerial and a Google and a tax map and some LiDAR that we had just for a representation for tonight. So there's 3 buildings. There's an old blacksmith shop, small building, a sizable barn, and then a residential house. You can see in the site. So the structure that we're looking at is the barn here in the middle. Proposing, of course, it's an old agricultural barn. Proposing to put a 3-unit apartment renovation to the building. And upon initially looking at it, reviewed the multifamily dwelling ordinance that the town has. And there were some questions that came up in reviewing that ordinance. And wanted to get an opinion from town, what their thoughts with and how it would apply to this, because we do have an existing structure. But it is a change of use, obviously. And a couple of requirements in section 6 of the ordinance. It does call out the building shall not exceed 35 feet in height. As you can see from the photo that I provided, the building is over 35 feet in height. Definitely, did some rough measuring, and I'm thinking it's close to the peak, probably close to 40. Pretty tall barn. The other item that I was asking for an opinion of from the town was item F under section 6. And that reads, buildings shall be placed at least 100 feet from each other. Buildings shall be set back at least 75 feet from roads, 25 feet from any property line. We can make 2 of those, but the first item, when it says at least 100 feet from each other, we do have the existing house that's on the property that is a single family structure, has 1 unit in it. So those are our 2 items we'd like to get some clarification on. We're not looking to build new, we're using the existing structures that are in place. So We were hoping to get a clarification. Moving forward, if we are allowed to go the multi-family dwelling renovation for the building, we're looking at, we're gonna be have to add some parking. They have plenty of land here, obviously. So probably have some parking over in this area. We need to add a septic system. We need to add a well. So those will be located in the rear of the barn. Either on either side of the existing gravel road. We have this gravel road that comes in. We'll probably use that for access. And use parking, you know, on either side, depending on how we lay it out and design it. So, yeah, so I guess that's our question for tonight is what the board's thought is on the ordinance, where it is an existing building and we're not building new. If we could get a variance for those two items. And if not, we might have to look at a different route for our project.
No, I think you pretty much covered it. It's a beautiful, beautiful barn.
Mhm.
It's just sitting there. And I just think that it would be so really beautifully cool to put like apartments in it that it's part of a barn. I don't know, it seems magical to me. So anyway, that's why we're here.
It is a beautiful, to me, it's a beautiful structure. I drive by it.
Yes, and
frequently,
it's
so.
unfortunately, it's just sitting there and it's gonna cost us some money to do some upkeep to it anyway. So rather than just kind of put money into a dead horse. I don't know, I just, you know, we want to keep the beauty of the barn. I mean, we're not, you know, we want to keep it outside and actually in the inside, there's some big old beautiful posts and beams. I think it was his great grandfather and my great grandfather that built it. So we don't want to, you know, change the outside look too much. We just, anyway, it's just sitting there going to rot and we want to do something nice to it.
Understood.
Yeah, repurposing, basically.
Yes.
Great.
And you know, if you live across, it's just a big beautiful barn.
Yeah, it is. It is.
If this building is divided into 3 apartments, does it also have to come under subdivision?
So that's a good question, Rich. If you go to the page 4 of the ordinance, under the guidelines we would have to use for approving a project under this ordinance.
We do have the land, like, we do have I read those, we have an acre for every, and a half one for every bedroom. I mean, we definitely have all of that.
Yeah, I think Rich's question is a little different, though. There are 3 options here. Is it conformance with a duly adopted subdivision regulation or subdivision ordinance, or comprehensive plan for land use plan, whatever that is. I mean, of course, this was done in 1978, so, you know, dealing with ancient history here, but, and so, you know, if it was in conformance with the comprehensive plan, which to me means, is it in a district that doesn't prohibit this use, we could make a finding that it's consistent with the comprehensive plan and avoid the need for it to go for approval under the subdivision ordinance.
I believe that's in the village district, isn't it?
I'm sorry, Craig. I
Is that
think-
in the village district right there?
Yes.
Is it? I wasn't sure. I was gonna ask if we could look at the map, but
Yeah.
if that's the case, that there's no problem.
It's almost right across from Horse Point Road, so.
Exactly.
Yeah, so that would
Children's
be in a
Hospital,
village
yeah.
district, yeah, so that. I think the answer then to your question, Rich, is no, it wouldn't need to, as long as it's consistent with the comprehensive plan.
And the comprehensive plan has, with that village district, because there are 3 village districts, right? And that is one of them.
Right, right. Unless there's something else that I'm not thinking of, that you thought of, Rich.
I need to look, but I don't have the answer right off. Obviously, I will not ask the question.
The other thing I would add to that, okay, so your proposal kind of falls into this black hole in county regulations. In the sense that your definition of subdivision in our town subdivision ordinance has been superseded by that in state law. And so I went to the definition of subdivision in state law, and its focus is entirely on, when you're dividing up a structure, it's entirely on the development of a new structure, not an existing structure.
I've done a lot of subdivision approvals for, in a subdivision, state law also said if you have an existing commercial building and you divide it up into dwelling units, you have to go through the subdivision process, but I wouldn't really classify this as a commercial building, so. Yeah, I've had to do that a lot in downtown Augusta and those existing buildings, but
Yeah,
imply here.
I would agree with that myself personally, because this is not a commercial structure.
Right,
currently.
currently,
And
right.
then section 12, waivers and variants, where the planning board finds that extraordinary and unnecessary hardships may result from strict compliance with these standards, or where there are special circumstances of a particular plan that may vary these standards, of substantial justice may be done and the public interest secure, provide that such variation will not have the effect of nullifying the intended purpose of this ordinance. So an extra 5 feet in height to me is nothing to me.
Right.
And how, it's gonna be 100 feet, what are we, 75 feet?
I haven't done an actual dimension on it, but it's definitely, I'd say it's probably under 50 for that house.
50.
Yeah. It's nowhere near 100, but
So Craig's right, there's an option to apply for a waiver. This ordinance is so old that the variance thing, I'm sure is illegal at this point, but you know, we can do a waiver just like we do under the commercial development review ordinance.
Right.
And with respect to the 35-foot height, that's the same as what's in the minimum lot size ordinance, although that ordinance pushes it back to this ordinance, if this ordinance should apply. I don't know the basis of that. I assume it has to do with the capabilities of the fire department in terms of reaching a height of 35 feet plus with their ladders. It's usually what the minimum lot size ordinances are based on.
So I don't know if it will help, but if we were only gonna make it 2 floors and then have the roof, I mean, in my head, I don't, you know, and have the top just, it would be the attic. So there
Right,
wouldn't be
okay,
anybody-
yeah.
There wouldn't be anybody up in the top 10 feet. In.
So where I was going with this was, and that would be, could be part of it, is if you wanted to request a waiver from that 35-foot for our consideration, then you could base it on maybe some input from the fire department, what you just said, you know, is that the residents actually will be lower than 35 feet.
Yeah, it's regular 2-story.
And so that's an option.
You know,
I don't know what I don't know if anybody else has any thoughts on what the basis or purpose of the 100-foot separation between buildings was. I don't.
The only thing I can
We
think
can't
of
move
again is fire.
Fire, yeah,
I don't
then you
know.
fire.
Is it like how we've seen in another ordinance where the height of the structure and the distance to something else in the case of a fire might jeopardize something in the case of a collapse?
Yeah, but we've even lightened that ordinance up compared to what it used to be. It used to be
Correct.
twice the height.
Correct.
And we've changed that. to, I can't remember it off the top of my head, but it's brought things closer because we have a lot of small camp roads.
Right, exactly.
And again, our fire department's so upgraded right now, it's one of the best ones around.
Mhm.
We've got a fire department, a couple hundred yards down the road.
That should help the insurance rate.
Yeah, exactly.
So
And
does
that,
this one.
you know, this, going back
Right,
to the
right.
I don't know what the comprehensive plan says this, but, you know, we do need more housing. And this building's already existing, so we're
Yeah.
not changing any.
That is a finding of the comprehensive plan.
Yeah.
It's consistent with it in every regard too.
Where did you get this stuff about the comprehensive plan? In compliance with the comprehensive plan? I kind of missed out on that.
Oh, okay, so it has to do with what district it's in.
Mhm.
And in the land use chapter, and I have it here if anybody wants to look at it, you know, it has the different districts.
Yeah.
As Craig pointed out, this is in the village district, so multi-unit family dwellings would be consistent with the uses in that. I mean, that absent the industrial one or the general development one, or whatever they call it, this is the most inclusive of land uses.
Okay. And when you're talking about that, I'm looking at the definition of subdivision in our current subdivision ordinance. And it says the term subdivision shall also include shopping centers and industrial and commercial developments of 3 or more separate or distinct units of land, structures or parts of it. Well, maybe I'm reading the wrong one. Oh, in addition, the term, it's about 2/3 of the way down on page 9. It says, in addition, the term subdivision shall include campgrounds, cluster housing, mobile home parks, motels, hotels, apartments, condominiums, cooperative housing, and other multifamily housing. If any of the above 3 or more, if any of the above contains 3 or more living units. It seems to go along with what I recall the definition of subdivision in earlier times, that you take a building and you divide it up into 3 living quarters, you created a subdivision. And I'm just going back to, I'm not sure yet in my mind that it doesn't need to go through subdivision regulations or ordinance.
And I would agree with you if it wasn't for the fact that state law supersedes that. That definition goes back to 1988. And the state subdivision law and the definition of subdivision supersedes that in a couple of different important ways. One is that the town can't be more restrictive or more stringent in its definition of subdivision than what's in state law, which is kind of unique.
And this new definition kind of throws.
Yeah, and let me just read it. I'll skip the part about, you know, dividing up lots and all that kind of stuff. The term subdivision also includes the division of a new structure or structures, and I think the operative word here is new, on a tract of or parcel of land into 3 or more dwelling units within a 5-year period of time. The construction of or placement of 3 or more dwelling units on a single tract previously used for commercial or industrial use. It doesn't say residential or, and so that's how I reached that conclusion, Rich.
Yeah, I understand that.
So if we're thinking that definition that you just read, George.
I mean, if anybody wants to look at it, other than just me, you're welcome to it. If you want to look at it, Rich.
No, I wasn't trying to be a roadblock. I just wanted.
No, I understand you. Yeah, I looked at our subdivision ordinance first too.
Okay.
Sure.
Yeah, so we are, if we have consensus around the idea that the new definition, as is written, would not have this particular application go to a subdivision, it would not qualify as a subdivision, right? Because
That's
it's,
my take on the,
because it is not an existing commercial, or what was the other phrase?
industrial.
Or industrial, it's purely residential. If that's the case, going from residential to residential, according to that, it sounds like it would not meet a subdivision. It sounds like, I'm not a lawyer. I just
Yeah,
saying.
I agree with that, yeah. That's what my experience is on.
So, in tonight's meeting is a pre-application, so we're not deciding this, correct?
No, it's just, yeah. it's
Just a
informal.
discussion to
It's just
find
a
out.
You
discussion,
just need some guidance from us.
Right, to see how we go forward.
Yeah, if you guys are gonna shoot it down and go, no way.
Well, like the 100-foot separation. We're looking at an existing non-conforming, because it's been there, well, the barn's been there since the 1800s, and the last time that the farmhouse was modified at all was in the 1980s.
Really.
So, I mean, they've been there a while.
Yeah. So, and I think the 2 points that we want to talk about was the 35-foot height.
Yep.
Thing. I think we've at least had some opinions about that, that maybe that could be addressed. Maybe with some input from the fire marshal. I would be amenable to that idea myself. It seems like others would be too. And it seems like it fits. That would be permissible based on the ordinance that we have that talks about where we have that authority to do so. Right. So I'm not saying we're stepping outside the bounds, maybe it's just.
Those you would need to be sent to us would be a letter from Dan McKenzie, fire chief.
Yep, yeah, we talked to the chief about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, we promised to keep all the residents under.
I mean, that could be part of the justification for a waiver.
Oh, yeah, we put a building section together, show 35 feet, show how we're, you comply with that, yeah.
Then in terms of the distance, since we were just kind of, noodling on some ideas about why it could have existed, this 100-foot thing to begin with. And
Most likely it was a identifier separation issue.
I think so, in case you had, buildings collapsing and
Right.
then catching something else on fire. That's my guess. I don't know.
Yeah. Based on a 1978 fire department.
Yeah, and maybe that's another part of the letter there.
Yeah.
Well, your old ordinance would require a 35-foot building to fall down and flip completely over in order to maintain a 75-foot setback. That was a little prohibitive.
You don't think that would happen?
Are the odds kind of?
I'm not a structural engineer, however, it would seem unlikely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know, from direct contact in particular. So to help answer your questions, for the board, do we have any other concerns about anything that they've talked about so far? Anything that would be a showstopper that we need to talk about? You've already talked about, if you were to go forward with this, you'd want to make sure that because there's no septic, right?
Right,
So
yeah.
there'd be all those things that would be drawn up and you'd be showing us and we'd
Yeah.
know about it and all that.
That'd be the next step, yeah, laying all those out for the plan,
You talked about parking.
parking, yeah.
Yeah, and it's already an existing road there, so we don't have.
We don't have to have an entry permit
Yeah.
or any of that because it's in place.
Right.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that's in the ordinance, George, that we would say,
No,
oh,
I
this is a
think in
thing?
terms of the review criteria that we would have to use to make findings of fact, it really was only this issue about, does it fall under the subdivision ordinance or not? Or is it defined as a subdivision? Or is it consistent with the comprehensive plan, and I think we've,
Yeah.
figured that out. And then it's the standards that we've already been talking about, that you've already
Yeah,
walked us through.
yeah, and we can meet all the others, 2 parking spaces per unit.
I mean, the other things are pretty
Talks about no more than 8 dwelling units,
basic or apply to pretty large proposals, 18 dwelling units or more.
Yeah, and we'll go with all the other items.
I can't think I don't have anything
I
else.
don't have anything else, but
Is it,
And have 2 luxury ones there, not, and avoid the ordinance.
Yeah.
yeah,
That was our next step. If we, I didn't know what we were.
That was Plan B.
So I'll have a
I have pictures
conversation.
of them being luxurious anyway.
yeah.
Like, I don't think they're supposed to be, I don't know. I'm excited.
Well, Barnwood Builders, when they go through, I don't know if you guys have watched that show, but they do some beautiful things, with existing structures.
Yeah, it is a nice farm. So I'll have a conversation with fire chief and
Okay,
gauge him and we'll go from there.
for the planning board members, is there anything from the comprehensive plan that we need to discuss that would be relative to this?
No, as Craig said, it's
the
in the
village.
village district, is totally consistent with that.
So can you explain the village district? I mean, I figure we're out in like rural North Belgrade.
We can also get the map. Anthony, is there a map that we can show?
I think there's one.
Yeah, I can try. I think that the thought was that the town, to meet certain standards, when it was doing the comprehensive plan, had designate areas that would most likely be where future development will happen
Oh, like
or should be
apartment
encouraged to
buildings.
happen. And the obvious ones would be Belgrade Lakes Village, the depot, and that part of Belgrade. I mean, there used to be a store there isn't now, but it seemed at the time like that.
Yeah, and that road intersection. for the
Big time
development.
intersection. You bet.
Right. Up in the
I mean, I
village.
guess it's a marijuana grow facility now, but
Yeah.
Yeah, the other type of village.
where the real money is.
Yeah, it has, exactly, I was gonna say.
I had proposed that.
Well, only
At
half of
one
our
point, it
property is in
didn't
the
go.
village, the rest of it back here. is not.
No,
sure.
that's not where your
We made.
barn is.
All right, thank you.
And maybe, so did that help answer just pictorially, knowing that there are 3 spots in the municipality that seem like this is where people will live, and we'd like to encourage with it, and there's already stuff there, right?
Well, and commercial development.
Precisely, which is the other part, right?
Oh, so like the two-piece lumber mill that isn't two-piece lumber mill anymore, and the store that isn't the store anymore.
Right, I mean, or,
But the
you
lumber-
know,
the lumber mill is not Hammond. So
No, they got sold.
oh, from
It's
Hammond,
Main wood,
I can't keep
main
up.
wood treaters.
correct.
Yeah.
Right.
They have one other company down in Sabatis. Is it Sabatis?
I think it was, wasn't it?
Mine-
Don't
mine
they do
did.
Oh,
that? Mine it,
Minor?
mine it, Mechanic
Somewhere.
Falls.
Mechanic Falls.
Mechanic
Oh,
Falls,
yeah.
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 So that's the idea with the village districts, that there would be a multitude of types of things, there'd be residents there, there'd be businesses there, much like you find in the village, right?
But they figured it is.
so we're
Which-
just
which
falling right
one?
into that plan. and that's-
Exactly.
You do,
Yeah.
you do.
Cool.
So does that help you folks?
I think very much.
Yeah,
Yes, thank you.
yeah, thank you.
You're very welcome. Hopefully we'll see you around.
I'm guessing that we'll see us.
Hopefully we'll see you in North Belgrade.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
You're welcome.
Have a very nice night, and thanks for coming in tonight.
Al did get COVID, yeah, and had pneumonia,
No, really?
yeah. And then he went in the hospital, came out of the hospital, went home, and went back into the hospital. Now, last week, he's back home. And he's on a long road.
Yeah. I assume because his immune system's probably compromised, right?
Yeah, that and he had some fibrosis before in his lungs years ago.
Yeah.
Really latched onto that, so he's. Yeah, he's home though, so that's good, but he's got a long road ahead of him.
Would you just give him our best?
Yeah, a lot of us know him.
Yeah.
I worked with him.
Yeah.
A lot when I worked at DEP doing small water systems. He designed them for us.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely, we appreciate that.
Yeah.
Yep.
Please do. Thank you and have a great night.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Good night.
Great, that would go through, see, item C, so the pre-app meeting for the potential multi-family dwelling application. Anthony, you have a town?
Yes, I do. So I want to mention two items to you folks real quickly. At the November 16th select board meeting, so a week from this coming Tuesday, there's going to be a discussion about short-term rentals. There's a resident here in town who has asked the select board to consider an ordinance regulating short-term rentals, which is something that is popular in some parts of the state.
I mean, like an Airbnb.
Yes, yes. A short-term rental is, you know, not like staying just a couple of nights, but it's up to 30 nights. So, so anyway, so the select board chair has asked if a member of the planning board could attend that meeting and just be part of that discussion if necessary. So are there any volunteers? This is something that you could attend via Zoom. The evening of the 16th.
That's a Tuesday night.
Yeah.
November 16th. What time?
6:30.
6:30.
That's quite the kettle of fish.
The last city that I worked in, George, had eventually passed a short-term rental ordinance. And it was messy and divisive. And it does create a heavy regulatory burden on the municipality.
Yes, and it's just not Airbnbs, it's all these summer camps around here.
That's correct.
So you're taking,
It would be a lot of properties.
Yeah.
I feel you're gonna have a lot of feedback on that, but I'll be there, regardless.
Well, so when we send out the agenda in the packet, and that email always has the Zoom link on it, I'll just send it to the entirety of the board.
Okay.
And
All right.
But somebody else may want to chime in with a different viewpoint. Maybe,
Well, I've said it before when this subject's come up, but you know, in a town, as tradition as renting people renting out their camps or renting them through, the real estate agencies. I don't know how you separate
Correct.
one from the other and
well, and it would, as I said, it would administratively be a heavy lift.
Right. How do we enforce that? We don't have enough of
Well, we
Right now.
probably require a full-time code officer at that point.
precisely.
And it's like a lot of code enforcement, Peter. I mean, it would likely be based upon, if we had an ordinance in place, it'd be based upon resident complaints.
Right.
So a neighbor having a concern about another neighboring property.
so Anthony, do you have a sense of what problem we're trying to solve, in terms of a public nuisance or public
Yes.
health problem?
It's not the health, it's just a nuisance.
Or what problem?
A nuisance problem.
Noise and stuff like that.
Noise, big crowds, parking, mainly noise,
In,
lights.
in like the village or around
No.
the village?
No, just, and like Craig said, I mean, these camps are everywhere in this community.
Yeah,
So,
and most of them are cheek to jowl,
yeah.
They're what?
cheek to jowl, one right next to the other.
Oh, I know.
Learn something new every day, don't you?
Okay, so, we can count on at least one of you.
Yep.
Yeah, I'll be there too. I'll do it through Zoom.
Yes, yes. Since you're not a member of the select board, you can't
It's something
participate
like
now.
Anthony, one last thing I would just point out, this came to the planning board, or was brought to the planning board sort of by the back door with regard to a building down on Lakeview Drive, Lakeshore Drive, and I don't know what, nothing ever came of it, but there were a lot of complaints about noise and stuff. In that case, the problem was that the individual owning it was renting it out for bridal showers and bachelor parties.
Right.
And what we told Denny Ketchel at the time is that's a commercial use. It falls under the commercial development review ordinance. We don't need a separate ordinance for that.
But then again, I mean, you sort of get back to Craig's point, is how do you start forcing every camp owner who rents out their camp to come and get a commercial permit?
Right, for somebody that wants to rent it, to have a wedding on the lake. You know, that's kind of pushing them. It's, I mean,
Well, you know,
how
my,
many weddings have happened on the lakes around here that they've rented a camp?
but even, you know, my wife and I rented a camp on Great Pond for a week this summer, just to spend a week on the water. And it's owned by a private individual. He rents it out to a few people through a local realtor and so just imagine every one of those property owners who does that. Having to be permanent.
Probably how a lot of them have to get to pay for the cost of buying it.
Well, that's
Correct.
And some people, that's how they generate the money to pay the taxes on it.
Correct. So,
Okay, so that's number one. Number two is, before Gary's passing, I had raised some concerns about what's going on at All Seasons Tree Service on the West Road. And Gary and I had a lot of discussions as to whether or not that is something that needed to be permitted under the commercial development review ordinance. I felt certain that it did. And, but that issue was not resolved prior to Gary's passing. And so I've had a lot of discussions with the owner of All Seasons about this. He's a little reluctant to come before you. And part of what he has told me is that before he purchased the property, he came and talked to the code enforcement officer and explained what his plans were and was told that he did not need any permit. And I have no reason to believe that that's not in fact the case. But if that is the case, my opinion is that the code enforcement officer was simply mistaken. And, so I'm trying to coax him into engaging with you guys in going through the commercial development review process. But I think he's not convinced that it's necessary with what he's done to and is doing with the property. And I said, okay, so in order for the board to determine whether or not this is even a process that you need to go through, they need to know more about what you've done to the property, what you're doing, what you're planning for. So if you're not willing to come to them, what if they came to you? So what I suggested was a site visit, not by a majority of the board that would require posting, but of two of the members, just to get a fuller understanding of what's happened at that property, what's going on. And he said he was agreeable to that. The only stipulation that he made was he'd like Craig to be one of those two members because he knows Craig, says he's comfortable with Craig. I said, I don't foresee that being a problem. And the other member would appropriately be the board chair. And I said I would be there. And if he's available and I can convince him, I said, I'd be happy to bring Dave Savage along, who's helping us out right now with code enforcement.
I think it's appropriate that he goes out there because in my mind, if the whoever the owner is, I can't understand, doesn't go along with the determination based on site visit, he's the one who's gonna have to be the one. We're not gonna enforce not getting a permit, but he would.
Well, and I just think he needs some reassurance. I think he's thinking that it's gonna cost him a lot of money in engineering fees and so forth to go through this process. I'm not convinced that that's necessarily the case. I do think you should probably need some screening requirements. I think one of the considerations is sort of what he's doing with fuel storage there. He's got his equipment, some fuel tanks there. And, you know, and maybe just some an agreement that, you know, there's not gonna be wood chipping going on there at all hours of the day and night that would disturb budding property owners. And I think if you get a determination from you guys, that's really all that's involved here. And I think they'll be much more amenable to going through the process. And I've offered, you know, to help him in any sort of way I can. He seems a bit intimidated by the form. I've tried to reassure him. Most of that form is not going to relate to you. And it's a simple matter of, as the Lady of the Lakes did recently, just sending you guys a note saying, I, you know, formally request a waiver from this, this, and this. And I said, she was a one-woman show and she did it, and, you know, and you can too, and we'll help you in any way that we can.
So Craig, is that something you're willing to do a site visit? I'd be happy to do one. So if we want to go out there, it's like a time that could work.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking, since the time is changing now,
Yeah,
and so after work, you know, won't work very well because it'll be dark.
right.
But maybe if we had like an early morning meeting, with like at 7 o'clock in the morning, the sun will be up then. And if there's anyone's working, so we got to think about that possibility.
I'm working right in the village, or just outside the village, so.
Okay.
Yeah, I can certainly do 7.
Okay.
We just need to know what day.
Yeah. Are there days that are better or worse for you guys?
There are better days for me and worse days.
Saturday and Sunday.
That's bad for me.
Yeah. Right now, let's see. What's next week is 8, 9, 10, 11, right?
And 11 is a holiday.
Right. And I'm taking those days off from work. So
Okay.
next week
Okay.
actually offers flexibility, much more flexibility to spend an hour out there or something.
Okay, well, why don't you send your schedule to me that you would be available, CC Craig on that.
Okay.
And then I'll work with All Seasons and with Dave Savage to see.
So
Time is not work.
if you actually have availability, it could be like 9 o'clock or something.
Yeah, I'm good at, I can do it at 9. It doesn't have to be 7 from my schedule if I'm taking that time off.
Be better for 9 for me, I'll wait and get to the job site and do my thing. Get
Oh,
the
and then
guy
boom,
started.
yep,
So,
okay. Is that okay?
9 works perfect.
9? Okay, we'll do. I'll come up with a suggestion. I'm thinking Tuesday at 9. Tuesday, is that the
That would be these,
9th?
the 9th.
So Peter, just as a reminder, I'm gonna recuse myself from all the discussions and decisions because it would be inappropriate for neighbors.
Neighbors, yeah.
And I want to be able to protect my own personal interests.
Interest makes great sense, and I'm glad you reminded me of that and this group to be aware of that, so that would be good. So we'll need a quorum, so I'm hoping that as we hear this, that as we know that you will be there, Sarah, I'm hoping will be here.
Sure.
Great,
So
and Rich will be here.
One last thing.
Yep.
Last night we interviewed 2 code enforcement officer candidates, and Peter is part of that interview panel. And it seems, so, you know, I had high hopes that we were going to be able to share a code enforcement officer with another community. That newly certified officer just took a full-time position in another community. So we lost out on that opportunity. So it looks like we're going to be back to growing our own code enforcement officer. But we had 2 really viable candidates last night.
Mhm.
And afterwards, we had a lot of discussion. And, you know, we felt like either one of them could do the job and would do a good job. It's probably going to be just a matter of style and some finer points as what we think their strengths and weaknesses are. We are going to interview one more candidate a week from Monday. And so So anyway, so I just want you folks to know that we're working on and hopefully making progress on how we get code enforcement. And in the meantime, I'm having a discussion tomorrow with a local plumbing inspector who might be able to help us with plumbing inspections until we get a new officer license. That's all I have.
Thank you, Anthony. Appreciate that.
And I will say, as far as the minutes, I think Julie had some problems with her computer during the recording, so we may want to just hold off on that and give her a chance to.
Let's, because I saw that email about
Yeah.
having trouble with the
Yeah.
audio. So we'll postpone that one. Anything else we need to know about? For a town business? or
Yes,
anything?
you need to know that it's past my dinner time.
So,
I had a question, but I guess I won't ask it.
At least you probably don't have five.
No,
What was the date of that select board meeting?
the 16th, 6:30.
do any other planning board members have anything to bring up tonight? No. Well, I think we should entertain a motion to adjourn.
I made a motion to adjourn.
We hear a
I'll
second?
second.
And seconded. All those in favor?
Yes.
Yes?
No prompting
Yeah,
there, huh?
yeah, yeah, okay, everybody's in favor. Good night, everybody. Thank you.